Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you this beautiful day wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to bring you this amazing content. We've got a great show lined up for today. Dr. Zachary Foster is here. Zachary Foster has a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. He's a fellow at the Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights. He runs a digital archive called Palestine Nexus and writes a newsletter called Palestine in Your Inbox. I've followed his work for some time now, especially in light of the genocide in Gaza, and his scholarship is really brilliant. It's fantastic, it's insightful, it's accessible. And given where we are now, going on 400 days, I wanted to bring him on as a scholar to talk about some of the history that legacy media typically ignores or censors or just misrepresents. At the end of the day, we are only as strong as the information that we have in front of us. And it is critical to me that we continue to share this information. You know, someone said this a while ago, that it's instructive what is happening to Palestinians in Gaza because our government is funding it. And if they're funding it and getting away with atrocities over there, then you better believe they're going to try to do the same thing over here. So if for no other reason than self-preservation, it is critical that we recognize these injustices for what they are, call them out, and demand accountability. Hopefully, as my listeners, hopefully as fellow citizens, each of you recognize that this is more than just self-preservation. This is basic human dignity for the Palestinian people. And it's critical we are aware of what's going on. So, we're going to go to break in a bit and bring him on. Before I do, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of what's happening. What are the impacts of that siege on Gaza here at home? As many of you know, I live in the Chicagoland area. There's a suburb of Chicago right near me called Downers Grove, Illinois. This week, there was a nasty anti-Muslim attack on a Muslim couple right here in Downers Grove. And before anybody says, well, that's probably just, MAGA Republicanism, Downers Grove is a pretty blue city. It's the congressperson's a Democrat. The local state officials are Democrats. It's a strong Democratic committee. But this week, a pregnant Muslim woman and her husband suffered a racist attack at a Panera Bread of all places in Downers Grove, Illinois. And the disturbing video is less than a minute long, but it's of a white woman verbally and physically attacking them because they wore a Palestinian hoodie. And the video is viral on social media. I've put it out on my social media if you haven't already seen it. But just as disturbing as the attack in broad daylight is that dozens of people in the store sat there and watched. Not a single person came to their aid. This is not MAGA country, guys. This is part of the bluest parts of Illinois, in the suburbs of Chicago. And so we need to ask, why did nobody speak up? The husband, a guy named Qasim Zahran, was quoted by local media after the attack, and he said that she walked by us, she saw my Palestinian sweater, and that caused her to say, F Palestine, F you, F Palestine. And I want to point out a couple of things. First, if you watch the video, you notice Qasim Zahran's patience, his situational awareness, his self-control. And kudos to him for maintaining his calm and de-escalating as best as he could. And most importantly, protecting his wife. That takes courage, compassion. He exemplified both, and kudos to him. That's not easy to do. But second, and this is the part that I want to reflect on, nobody else intervenes. We can see another woman standing right behind the attacker, buying her coffee, just minding her own business. I think the attacker even brushes up against her, and she doesn't even turn around or acknowledge that something is going on. It's a loud altercation. I mean, this woman tries to throw her hot, scalding coffee on this pregnant woman, and nobody at Panera takes action. Nobody in the rest of the store even bothers to get up from their tables despite the noise, despite the coffee being spilled, despite this woman yelling out F Palestine. And again, this is a blue district. It's not some deep red Republican seat. And I state this to make it clear that it would be foolish to dismiss this as, well, that's just what Republicans do. No. Was this attacker a MAGA racist? Maybe. Was everyone in that store a MAGA white supremacist? Doubtful. And that's a lesson I want to emphasize, that this event exemplifies what we mean when we say, let's talk about the difference between being not racist and being anti-racist. You know, there's plenty of people who might agree, well, that's wrong. She shouldn't have done that. I'm not racist. But this shows that that's just not enough. When a person is also anti-racist, they go beyond verbal condemnations after the fact, and they take action to undo injustice in real time. Anti-racists try their best to protect people who are being attacked while the attack is happening, when it matters. And in this situation, that could have manifested in a number of ways. It could have manifested in standing up and saying, hey, I'm calling 911 right now. But nobody got up and called. It could have meant getting up and forming a human wall between the attacker and the innocent pregnant woman being attacked. But nobody stood up. It could even have been as simple as raising awareness in the store to do something and let the attacker know that, hey, what you're doing is wrong and racist. Stop. But nobody spoke up. You know, dangerous examples like this exemplify the phrase, being silent is being complicit. And especially as Trump's new Muslim ban is expected to go live sometime in late January of 2025, we know it's going to get worse. If 2017 is any indicator, we can likely expect to see a spike in anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-brown hate crimes. Our Arab Christian friends, our South Asian Christian friends, our Hindu friends, our Sikh friends are going to suffer the consequences as well. And then finally, we really can't ignore the white privilege in this scenario. First of all, just imagine if the roles were reversed and a person of color, a Latino, an Asian, a Black person attacked a white woman. Imagine the media outrage. Imagine how right-wing politicians would have run wild to spread fear and disinformation nationally, demonizing every Black and brown person. In fact, you don't have to imagine. Look at the demonization they made of Haitian immigrants off of a made-up story. And look at how effective it was. But now the roles are a white woman attacking a Muslim couple. And this is probably the first you've heard about it. And local media reports that police have identified this racist woman. First of all, she was allowed to leave just fine. She was allowed to leave the Panera just fine, no consequences, no accountability. And police have actually even identified her. And as of the recording of this show, even though they've identified her, even though they have video evidence that we're physically attacking them, they filed no charges, made no arrests whatsoever. God, how convenient. Look, I'm hopeful that the expectant mother who suffered this attack receives the support she needs. And I'm likewise hopeful that the racist woman who attacked her faces the accountability she deserves. But this is a difference between being not racist and being anti-racist. We need more anti-racists to dismantle the structures of white supremacy that allow this kind of bigotry to take place in the first place. And as we move forward into this next administration, we have an opportunity to recognize these injustices for what they are and stand united against them. This is an opportunity to recognize the importance of being anti-racist, to improve ourselves, to invest in those people and organizations doing the work of anti-racism to counter this violent rhetoric, and to collectively demand justice in all matters. That's how we not only survive these next 4 years, but meaningfully move towards a more perfect union, one built on true justice. As for me, I will continue doing everything in my power over these next 4 years to stave off fascism in the United States, and I cannot do it alone. That's why I invite you to support my work, subscribe, support my advocacy, and help us continue to build this coalition for justice. I'm grateful for your trust and support, but we got to get there together. All right. I am excited to bring on, after break, Dr. Zachary Foster. As I mentioned, he's one of the leading scholars on the questions of Palestine and Israel. He has a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. He's a fellow at Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and he runs a digital archive called Palestine Nexus. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. Don't go away. When we come back, we'll have Dr. Zachary Foster. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. I'm extraordinarily excited about our guest this week. Dr. Zachary Foster is here. Dr. Foster has a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. He's a fellow at the Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and he runs a brilliant digital archive called Palestine Nexus, and provides really insightful lectures and classroom sessions on just what is happening. And he writes an amazing newsletter called Palestine in Your Inbox, which I highly recommend you subscribe to, as I have. Dr. Foster, Zach, it's great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
I've been following your work for quite some time, especially in light of these last 400 days of genocide. And you've really been a beacon of wisdom, of hope in these really troubling times. I consider myself pretty well informed in this space, but every time I read something you write, I feel like I'm uncovering a whole new chapter of just history of Palestine, of Israel. And I think for me, it's a privilege to have you on the show, just because at the end of the day, we need more of the scholarship to be public and to be accessible. Before we kind of dive in, I'd love to learn more about kind of what's your superhero origin story? What made you decide this is an area you want to focus your life to and provide guidance and insight on?
I really appreciate that question. I grew up in a very Jewish Zionist environment, going to Jewish schools, Jewish summer camps, Jewish youth groups. When I was in high school, my youth group sent me to Israel for 5 weeks. And so I was raised with the belief that Israel is my homeland and it's the solution to thousands of years of persecution. And obviously I got interested in Israel as a result of that. And I think the more you study the history of Zionism and the state of Israel, the more pro-Palestine you become. Wow. That is to say, if you're open-minded and serious about actually understanding the history of Zionism, which was a movement of Jews who asked themselves, how do we create a Jewish state in a land that's 90% non-Jewish? And over the course of the 1910s, 20s, 30s, and 40s, every single major Zionist leader, starting with Ben-Gurion, going on down to Yosef Weitz, and Ze'ev Jabotinsky, and Golda Meir, and Moshe Shertak, every single one, Arthur Rupin, there were no exceptions. They all supported what they called transfer, which I would call, and I think everyone today would just call, ethnic cleansing. Because although they might have hoped the transfer would occur voluntarily, they all realized that the Arab Palestinians, they're not going to abandon their sources of livelihood and give up their land and just voluntarily exile themselves into another country. No, they have strong roots in the country, and they're not planning on going anywhere. And so the consensus among every Zionist leader, again, from the 1920s onwards, was these people are going to have to get uprooted by force. And I would recommend, if you want to dig deeper on this topic, I would recommend the work of Nur Masalha. And it was reading that book, Nur Masalha, a Palestinian historian of Zionism. It was reading his work that I realized that this project was just fundamentally immoral and unethical. And I think that was the starting point for me. And obviously there's a lot more to say, but for me, it was the realization that this project was deeply unethical that led me to want to study the history and learn Arabic and eventually do a PhD in Palestinian history.
That's powerful. And I'll ask you a bit more about it later, but I'm sure that was jarring, not just for you, but also for your family and your circle who saw you kind of go through this transformation and probably wonder what the heck happened or what's going on. There's a documentary out called Israelism right now that kind of documents a similar story of a young woman who kind of went on Birthright Israel, and after getting there began to realize, hold on a second, 2 + 2 isn't exactly adding up to 4 right now. But let me kind of stick with your story about kind of realizing the history of the 1910s, 2030s. What was it about post-Holocaust world that helped accelerate this process? Do you see a nexus between that? Do you see that as any kind of tipping point? And what role do you think that played?
In my case, the impetus for digging deeper was a visit to actually a semester I spent in Jerusalem as a study abroad student, where here I thought I was going to learn Hebrew, which I did, and study in my quote unquote homeland, living the Zionist dream. But in fact, for me, living on Mount Scopus, uh, basically in part of Arab Jerusalem, which is sort of, essentially on French Hill, right by Sawiya. Here I
Yeah.
am in Hebrew class with half Palestinians. This was very eye-opening for me. I really had no exposure before that.
Wow.
And so that was kind of the first moment where I started to ask myself, why is it that Palestinians in East Jerusalem don't even know Hebrew?
Wow.
Ah, it's because Israel occupied East Jerusalem in 1967, and annexed East Jerusalem, annexed the land, but not, of course, the people who do not have Israeli citizenship, who can be stripped of their residency rights for being born of the incorrect ethnicity. And again, this was the starting point for me. And so, I dug deeper. But I would say most American Jews don't even have that experience. They don't even put themselves in the country that they apparently are so devoted to. They don't experience what life is like in the country that they apparently love so much. But I think, by the way, this is why so many American political leaders think of Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's more of a media, a journalist and a writer. But think of all of the congressional officials, people like Jamal Bowman, who talk very openly about advocating for human rights. It's because they spent time in the West Bank.
Right.
They've traveled around. They've seen the reality on the ground, where they go to Hebron and they visit, Shuhada Street, and they see what Israelis and Palestinians are literally neighbors. They literally live side by side, except the Israelis have full rights. They have freedom of movement. They have the right to vote for the government that controls their lives. And the Palestinians who live across the street, they have no rights. They have no freedom of movement. They're occupied peoples. They cannot vote. They do not have freedom of movement. They could be arrested and imprisoned indefinitely for having committed a crime in the future. It's called administrative detention. And
Yeah.
this is what we call apartheid. And that's a reality that they've all seen when they go and visit the Palestine.
You're just tuning in. We're speaking with Dr. Zachary Foster. He is a fellow at the Rutgers Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and received his PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University. And, I visited occupied Palestine in 2022 and experienced that firsthand, saw it firsthand in South Hebron, among other places. I've, in that 3-week span, I had on 5 separate occasions, as a US citizen, as an attorney, traveling with veterans, traveling with former Israeli soldiers, members of Breaking the Silence, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. On 5 separate occasions, I was forced to show my papers at gunpoint. And I thought to myself, if this is what I'm experiencing as a US citizen who is traveling with veterans and former Israeli soldiers and have essentially their protection, because I was about to be arrested until one of them intervened. Imagine what it's like being a Palestinian and having none of those rights whatsoever. And some of the testimonials that were shared were truly daunting and horrifying. And this word apartheid has been used by virtually every human rights organization out there. How do you respond to the claims that, well, that's just an anti-Semitic phrase to use? What goes through your mind when you hear that as a defense for the clear injustices that you're seeing?
Well, where to even begin? I mean, apartheid is a legal concept. It was obviously first implemented in South Africa. That's where the word comes from. But as is the case with much of international law, we start from the specific and then we extract out the specific and try and understand what is the bigger thing happening here. We extract out a legal definition, and that's what happens with the Rome Statute in the late 90s, or was it the early 2000s, in which apartheid is defined as a crime under international law, in which you have a state that is we could pull up the exact word for word definition, but basically a state is carrying out cruel and policies in order to preserve the domination of one racial group over another. That's the basic idea. And when you travel around you travel around Palestine, this is a textbook case of apartheid. You have in the West Bank, which is, let's say, 20% of historic Palestine, you have 2 groups of people. You have Israelis and you have Palestinians. And for the past 57 years, so this is, by the way, not something that has been going on for years or decades, but more than a half century.
Yeah.
You have 2 groups of peoples living, like we said, side by side. In some cases, their houses are literally touching one to the other. And one group of people, they can vote, They have freedom of movement. When they're arrested, they must be brought before a judge in 24 hours. Whereas you have another group of people, they're the Palestinians. They do not vote for the government that controls their lives. They do not have freedom of movement. There are more than 600 obstacles and roadblocks and checkpoints in the West Bank that you yourself have experienced, where their freedom of movement is curtailed. And if they are arrested, they must be brought before a judge within 192 hours. It's a completely different legal system. And then when they go to the judge, it's a military court. It's a military judge where the conviction rate is 99.7%. So it's a different legal system. They're not subject to a civilian court or a civilian judge or civilian laws. They're subject to the rules and the laws and the policies that are of the Israeli military. So, I mean, this is a textbook case of apartheid, and it's just getting worse and worse. And every day, every month, every year, the Israeli government over the past 20 years has just become more and more right-wing and more fascist, and is passing more and more laws to restrict Palestinian freedom of movement. Just to give you one data point to get a sense of how insane this policy is. If you are a Palestinian living in Area C of the West Bank, and the West Bank is divided into 3 areas, we could talk about the other 2 areas as well, but in Area C, where you have about somewhere between 100 and 200,000 Palestinians, you are 100 times more likely to have a demolition order placed on your home than you are to be granted the right to build a home. And that's because the Area C is 60% of the West Bank. It's the area of the West Bank that Israel has wanted to annex since 1967. There was an Israeli cabinet meeting already on June 19th, 1967, where they said the Jordan Valley is ours. The border with Jordan is ours. We want to control that border region because it's sparsely populated with Palestinians and it's strategic for its military value. And so we want to control that. And that has been the policy of every single Israeli government, no exceptions, from 1967 to the present. We want to control that land. So what do we, of course, we don't want the Palestinians living on it because we want to create a Jewish state with a Jewish majority to provide benefit to Jews. So Palestinians living on the land are a problem. And so they're 100 times more likely to have their home demolished than they are to be given a permit to build a home. That's 60% of the West Bank, the area the Palestinians want to create a state in. So that is the nature of Israeli apartheid. Meanwhile, throughout the West Bank, the Israeli Jewish settlements continue to expand. Every year, it's just up and to the right. Look at the graph of Israeli settlers in the West Bank. It started off at 0 in 1967, and today it's close to 1 million. They're just taking over the Palestinian land, square foot by square foot, every day of every month of every year for 56 years.
The textbook definition of apartheid is very simple: a policy or system of segregation or discrimination on grounds of race. That's it. I mean, this is not a complicated legalese, 84-word definition. It's literally 12, 13 words: a policy or system of segregation or discrimination on grounds of race. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. They have different colored license plates for whether you're Jewish or whether you're Palestinian. I mean, if that doesn't get more clear, and the reason why those plates matter, and Zach, I'd love for you to talk to our listeners more about this, is because depending on the color of your plates, there are certain roads you are and are not allowed to drive on. And people think I'm crazy when I say that, but if you could kind of elaborate on that a bit more, I think people need to understand how systemic this apartheid actually is.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So in the West Bank, there are 2 different colors of license plates. You will see yellow plates. Those are plates driven by Israeli citizens and residents of East Jerusalem. And then you have green license plates. Those are license plates issued by the Palestinian Authority, a subcontractor out, let's say, of the Israeli military that was brought in as a result of the Oslo process. So that because Israel didn't want to police the streets themselves, they wanted to subcontract that process out to the Palestinian Authority, which is today led by Mahmoud Abbas. But you're absolutely correct. If you have a green license plate, you're not allowed to drive on certain roads in the West Bank that are built for Israelis to connect the different Israeli settlements, 99% of whom are occupied by Jews. And this is something people forget. There's actually like an apartheid within an apartheid, which is there's the bigger apartheid system, which is, that you have all of these Israelis living in the West Bank and all these Jewish settlements, who only those people can drive on these, Israeli-only apartheid roads that are meant to connect the settlements. They're, obviously, newly paved roads, whereas the Palestinian roads are, oftentimes dirt roads. It's just everything you can think of where, the settlements are built on the hilltops, new construction, subsidized housings, funded by the Israeli government. The Palestinian construction, receives no Israeli funding, receives no, the Palestinian roads receive no Israeli government support. It is a classic case of apartheid where you have two systems, two peoples, where one group of people has all the rights and the other group of people has no rights at all.
You could remove the labels of Israeli and Palestinian and pretend you're describing Jim Crow America, and nobody would be able to tell the difference. James Baldwin talks about this when he's asked, why do you insist on color? When he's describing Jim Crow apartheid, United States of America. And he says, I look at the textbooks that white children receive, and I look at the textbooks that my children receive, and I see the difference. I look at the homes where white communities live, and I look at the homes that I'm forced into in the ghetto, and I see the difference. And essentially, we're seeing a repeat of that. And if you're just tuning in, we're speaking with Dr. Zachary Foster, fellow at Rutgers University. Zach, I guess the next logical question is, you've described a pretty stark case, a pretty clear-cut case. This is not like this squishy, maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's pretty straightforward, textbook definition. Why is there so much misinformation and confusion? Why are Americans so uninformed on the reality of what's happening on the ground?
Where to even begin with the problems in places like the United States, and I would say Western Europe as well? We are living in an environment where Zionism has been embraced for more than a century, right? When the Balfour Declaration was first announced in 1917, when the British government first announced its support for transforming Palestine from an Arab country to a Jewish country and subjecting the 90% of the country who was non-Jewish to subjugation by the 10% that was Jewish, when that process began in 1917, a year and a half later, Woodrow Wilson, U.S. president at the time, came out in support of it. Wow. By the way, most American Jews opposed it. 299 American Jews at the time came out with a petition and said, we do not support the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. As American Jews, we want full and equal rights in the United States. We don't want to be conflated with this other movement. Don't send us to Palestine. Please, we want to be accepted here. But in any case, every U.S. president since Woodrow Wilson has declared their support for a Jewish state in Palestine. And in part, this was owing to these Christian, theological, eschatological beliefs about Jews congregating in Palestine at the end of days, after which point there would be a rapture, and Jesus would return to planet Earth. There would be human redemption. So there was a theological element to this that continued well into the 1930s and 40s. Then, of course, there was the geopolitical element to this, the belief that we have to support any country that is sort of not communist, and that took and by the way, the United States has been supporting autocratic, apartheid, I would say even genocidal regimes for decades. There's nothing actually unique about Israel in this sense. We supported apartheid South Africa. We supplied weapons to apartheid South Africa, despite the UN's call, a non-binding call for ending arms shipments to South Africa in 1982. We continued to send them arms. The United States has supported every settler colonial state in Africa, the Portuguese settler colonial states in Angola and Mozambique. We supported the French in Algeria against their anti-colonial struggle. We send weapons to Saudi Arabia and the UAE to bomb Yemen. We support authoritarian states around the world. There's nothing actually that unique about the United States' support for Israel. But I would say, in addition to all that, the reason why it's so grotesque, I think, especially in recent years, is I would put a huge emphasis on the Israel lobby. This is AIPAC and Christians United for Israel. It's not just the Jewish lobby, of course. Christians United for Israel plays a key role in this as well. But you have, for example, AIPAC. They gave $4 million to unseat Andy Levin, who was a Jewish member of Congress in 2022, who was basically pro-Palestinian human rights, supporting the establishment of Palestinian state. They unseated him because he didn't support Israeli apartheid. And then, of course, in the most recent elections, we saw, obviously Jamal Bowman got unseated. He was calling for a ceasefire. He's gone. We saw Cori Bush. They spent $15 million on Jamal Bowman, $8 million on Cori Bush. Again, pro-Palestine, calling for ceasefire, gone. And then when you zoom out, you have basically the number one donor of the Democratic Party, Chaim Saban. He's a good friend of Bill Clinton. And in 2004 and 2010, he said, "I'm a one-issue guy. My issue is Israel." He served in the Israeli military. He gives hundreds of millions of dollars to the Democratic Party. The same is true on the Republican side. You have the late Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam Adelson. They've given hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, going all the way back decades, to the Republican Party to ensure its support for Israeli apartheid and now a genocide.
And to add to that really important analysis, Zach, it's that when they give this money, it's not necessarily to convince people that genocide is okay or apartheid is okay. They use that money to wage culture wars, to create fear mongering, while tapping into a politician who is going to be lockstep on this issue of genocide and won't dare call for a ceasefire. And so, I think in Michigan, for example, you had these super PACs running ads targeting Arab and Muslim voters about how Harris is hardcore anti-Palestine, and then on the flip side targeting Jewish voters about how Harris is hardcore pro-Palestine. I mean, just the deception and the mockery of our political process is out of control, and this is one of the problems of having so much money into politics. And so we're down to about our last 7 or 8 minutes, and I want to cover 2 more really important things. One, I want to close by making sure folks know where to find you and support your work. And I highly recommend you don't just read Zach's work, but you subscribe and you take his classes, because these are really critical. Where do we go from here? How do we address this? How do we undo the damage done? You mentioned apartheid South Africa a minute ago, and I'm reminded that Nelson Mandela was on the US terror watch list until 2008, for God's sake, right? Just 5 years before he passed away. And for me, a defining moment in my youth was when I was 18. I had a chance to go to South Africa, see Robben Island, see the prison cell in which Nelson Mandela was held prisoner for like 27 years. And it's not long enough for you to lay down in straight. You're curled up the entire time. I mean, they had him caged in there. And here's a man whose resilience is just off the charts. And even then, despite all of that, despite being the president of South Africa, he was on the terror watch list until 2008. So it almost seems hopeless at times, and seems extremely frustrating. And with the election results, what they are, I really don't like this notion that, well, Trump will be worse. Well, it's already genocide. And yes, Trump will further enable the genocide, but that doesn't mean that what was happening now is okay. But Zach, what do you see as practical action items people can take to bring about a sense of meaningful justice and progress in what we're seeing right now?
I think what we've learned over the past election cycle is that change is not going to happen at the ballot box. It's going to happen on the streets. It's going to happen in front of an Elbit factory. It's going to happen at demonstrations. It's going to happen lobbying our congressional officials the same way AIPAC does. It's going to happen in a variety of ways. It's going to happen in the media discourse. So we need to change the media discourse. We need to affect a change. And by the way, I think this is happening already. I think that if you go back 5, 10, 15 years, you would be hard to find very many media outlets that have an independent perspective, that are not slaves to the Israel lobby. So you're seeing Electronic Intifada, Mondo Weiss, 972, The Gray Zone, Democracy Now! Has been around for a while, but I would add them to that list. Your show is another show. There's so many independent voices now. The truth is accessible to everyone, and that will change things. So I think that's something we can be hopeful for. I would say as well that what we've seen by the Palestine Action Group based out of the UK, their ability to shut down Elbit factories that are sending the drones to the Israeli military, the same drones that are slaughtering Palestinians in the thousands, those actions have had a real effect. And guess what? Elbit is not just in the UK, Elbit's everywhere. I learned just the other day on the US-Mexico border, guess which company is providing the surveillance infrastructure in places like Texas? Guess what? It's Elbit. If you live in Texas, you are within a few-hour drive of a border where there's active Elbit equipment being used to surveil people. So you can go to the factories, go to the sites where these drones are being either put in place in action or being manufactured. You have now also huge boycotts taking place against companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. And all of these, I would say that the number one thing we can all do in our local communities, wherever we are, is guess what? Find out which aspect of the supply line that is supplying weapons, shipments of arms, or really anything else that is helping Israel support and carry out a genocide in Gaza. It could be the surveillance equipment, Hewlett Packard. It could be any number of companies that are providing support to this military. Figure out which one of them has a factory or has an operation or business office close to you, and go protest in front of it, because that has real impact. That has real and that's something you can do with your own two legs. You don't need a large social media following. You don't need, a big TikTok audience. You can do that. Organize a group of friends, bring out your family members, and you can have real impact. And that's what I would encourage everyone to go do.
And to our listeners, I swear we didn't plan this, but in the intro, Zach, I made a comment that you should care about the genocide being committed, if for no other reason than if it's being funded by our government over there, then they'll take the same actions over here in the United States as well, if given the opportunity. And the fact that you just pointed out that the Elbit factory that is sending these drones, that is slaughtering, according to a UN report, 5 9-year-old children as the most likely person killed, there's no doubt that that same process and procedure and justification will be used here in the United States against undesirables or against people that the government decides are a problem. And my point is that even if for no other reason than self-preservation, hopefully your reasons are beyond that, but even if you're the most selfish person in the world, you should still care about this, because there's no reason why you won't be next on this list of injustice. And that's why it's so critical. And using our legs to protest and to make our voice heard it's the oldest of American traditions, right? The Montgomery bus boycott is hailed universally as a turning point in the civil rights movement, because Black Americans said enough is enough, led by example, had the courage and the conviction to recognize the broader impact of what was happening, and they changed world history. And I think that's what we have as an obligation for our generation right now. Zach, down the last couple of minutes, how can folks support your work? How can they get involved in your work? And I really emphasize this, folks. If we're listening, I really emphasize this. It's not enough to simply be not racist. We need to be anti-racist. It's not enough to simply say that's wrong. We need to be anti-genocide. And supporting leaders and scholars and activists like Dr. Zachary Foster is one way to do that. So Zach, how can folks support you? How can they get involved? How can they invest in your work and elevate your profile?
Thank you so much for asking about that. So I teach courses that you can access, and on my website, PalestineNexus.com, I have a course on a kind of a Israel-Palestine 101, trying to understand the origins of violence in Palestine. And that's a 4-part lecture series. You can sign up for that on PalestineNexus.com. You can also sign up for the Zionism 101 course. We cover the history of Zionism, beginning with its origins in Christian Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, obviously focusing primarily on the period beginning in the late 19th century all the way through to the present. And so you can also, and that course is live. We're teaching lecture 3 is going to be on this Wednesday. So you can sign up for that. Again, everything is recorded. So you can, if you sign up after I've given some of the lectures, you can access all the recordings later. And then you can subscribe to the newsletter where I try and put out a piece every week, trying to provide historical context for the present moment. And that's free. Anyone can subscribe to that. I'm trying to make my work as accessible to everyone as possible. We also donate proceeds from the course. We donate to families in Gaza. And so you're also supporting people who have been victims of this genocide as well when you sign up for the course.
Zach, you're doing the Lord's work. I really can't thank you enough for your courage, for your conviction of being out there. I know, especially in academia right now, it's not easy. There's a lot of pressures to be silent. And for you to continue to speak up in the face of injustice is a testament to your character, to your integrity, and really to not that you've leaned into your religion as what's motivating you, but to what Judaic principles are of compassion, of love of all humanity. The Torah and the Quran both have a similar verse that to take one life unjustly is to kill all humanity, and to save one life is to save all humanity. And I think that's a driving principle that we can work on and stand united on. Zach, thank you for your work. I hope we can have you back on in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Qasim.
You guys, thanks for tuning in. We're going to go to break in just a second, but Dr. Foster is the kind of leadership that we need to continue to elevate. I've subscribed to his work. I'm going to be taking his classes. I encourage you to do so as well. You can follow him on social media at Zachary Foster. He's very easy to find. Just Google him. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Dr. Zachary Foster. And man, I just adore this guy. I mean, the scholarship, the insight, the precision of his convictions is truly powerful. And I highly encourage each of you to check him out on social media at Zachary Foster. And, subscribe for his classes. Guys, we got to elevate these platforms. We are being demolished in the narrative game, in the narrative concept, because we're just not investing the resources that we need to invest. So in addition to subscribing here, check out his work. We're going to have him back on in the future. As we close out, I want to continue the theme of kind of where we are right now, because the United Nations has labeled Netanyahu's acts against Gaza as, quote, consistent with genocide. And what's deeply disturbing is President Biden knows this, but he continues to arm Netanyahu in violation of US and in violation of international human rights law. And legacy media continues to ignore this ongoing genocide as well, funded by American tax dollars. And this is something that we need to grapple with. It's one of the most significant issues during the 2024 presidential campaign of what to do with Israel's siege on Gaza. And then finally in mid-October, it was clearly a play at votes. It was a pathetic play at votes, but the Biden administration issued a letter, another ultimatum to Netanyahu to stop bombing the civilians in Gaza within 30 days, to allow aid to enter, or the United States would cut off offensive arms to the Israeli military. Well, those 30 days passed. Netanyahu continued to bomb Gaza. Aid still has not entered, and President Biden has done nothing but continue to arm him. And so this is the problem, because this is setting an extraordinarily dangerous precedent. Back in April of 2024, Biden issued an ultimatum to Netanyahu. Tell me if you've heard this before. Stop bombing Palestinian civilians, he said, or the United States is going to uphold the Leahy laws and it's going to stop sending offensive arms to Israel. Well, Netanyahu said, okay, I see your threat and I'm going to give you the middle finger. He refused to comply. Meanwhile, not one, but two U.S. State Department reports confirmed that Netanyahu was committing war crimes against Palestinian civilians, including the war crime of withholding aid. ProPublica published a horrifying and fascinatingly important piece that documented, quote, and I'm quoting from the report, the U.S. government's two foremost authorities on humanitarian assistance concluded this spring that Israel has deliberately blocked aid, deliveries of food and aid and medicine into Gaza. The U.S. Agency for International Development delivered its assessment to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, and the State Department's Refugees Bureau made its stance known to top diplomats in late April. U.S. aid sent Blinken a detailed 17-page memo on Israel's conduct. The memo described instances of Israeli interference with aid efforts, including killing aid workers, razing agricultural structures, bombing ambulances and hospitals, sitting on supply depots, and routinely turning away trucks full of food and medicine. This is not some independent agency, guys. This is not one, but two US State Department agencies who report to Antony Blinken. And by the way, a UN Office of Human Rights report went on to document that, quote, according to figures verified by our office, close to 70% of those killed in Gaza by strikes, shelling, or other hostilities were children and women, with the age group most represented being children from age 5 to 9 years old. 5 to 9 years old. Inexcusably, despite knowing full well that Netanyahu was committing war crimes with US-funded weapons and mass murdering children, Blinken then went to Congress, ignored both State Department reports, and said, quote, we do not currently assess that the Israeli government is prohibiting or otherwise restricting the transport or delivery of US humanitarian assistance, end quote. He lied to Congress. Bold-faced lie. And Biden backed him up. And the genocide continued. I mean, in what world does a war of alleged self-defense mean mass murdering children 5 to 9 years old as the most represented fatality? And so in October, weeks before the presidential election, and with pressure mounting on VP Harris to act, Biden once more set an ultimatum to Netanyahu. He said, once again, I'm giving you 30 days, Netanyahu, to stop bombing Palestinian civilians and to allow aid to enter Gaza, or I'm going to restrict arms. In that 30-day period, the UN Office on Human Rights released this assessment, quote, Israel's warfare in Gaza is consistent with the characteristics of genocide, with mass civilian casualties and life-threatening conditions intentionally imposed on Palestinians there. Intentionally imposed. The most difficult part about proving genocide is intent, and the UN Office of Human Rights is saying that they are intentionally imposing these life-threatening conditions on Palestinians. The report continues to say, quote, since the beginning of the war, Israeli officials have publicly supported policies that strip Palestinians of the very necessities required to sustain life, namely food, water, and fuel. These statements, along with the systemic and unlawful interference of humanitarian aid, makes clear Israel's intent to instrumentalize life-saving supplies for political and military gains, end quote. And despite this, when the 30-day window concluded, the Biden administration claimed, contrary to all the evidence available, that Netanyahu had allowed aid to enter Gaza, and therefore the US would not cut off offensive arms. Instead, meanwhile, the thorough UN report said, quote, the main UN aid agency in Gaza says that Israel has failed to meet a US deadline to boost aid to the territory. Last month, the US Secretary of State gave Israel a 30-day ultimatum. The deadline expired, and the amount of aid getting into Gaza is at its lowest level in a year. Lowest level in a year. In fact, famine is imminent in northern Gaza, where hardly any aid has entered in the past month. The BBC report said Israel says that this aid is false because Israel has increased aid and Hamas is stealing the aid. A reminder that Israel made the same claim back in April, and an independent US investigation found that no, Hamas is not stealing the aid. No, Israel has provided no evidence of Hamas stealing the aid. And in fact, the Israeli military itself is blocking the aid. A US investigation found this last April. So this alleged aid that Israel claims reached Gaza, well, Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, confirmed, perhaps unsurprisingly, that the Israeli soldiers themselves are setting fire to the aid. They have video. It's making a circulation on social media. It's been verified of Israeli soldiers setting the aid on fire and setting the entire school on fire. Here is what I'm most afraid of at this point. Donald Trump has already said he's going to lift all military restrictions on Israel, 100%. And now President Biden has set the precedent that the Leahy laws don't matter, that international human rights law doesn't matter. And so when we try to hold Trump accountable, what's he going to say? He's going to say, hey, Biden did the exact same thing and you guys let him do it. So I'm going to do the same thing as well. Even though more than 61% of Americans across the political spectrum wanted to stop offensive military arms in Netanyahu, more than 77% of Democrats wanted to stop offensive military arms in Netanyahu, Biden refused to listen to the will of the American people, much less uphold American international human rights law. And now with Trump at the helm, it's going to be that much more difficult to hold him accountable when he can point to Biden as a precedent of ignoring his own State Department reports. My friends, this is the difference between being not racist and being anti-racist. Being not racist means, yeah, I think that's wrong. Being anti-racist, being anti-genocide says, this is wrong, and I'm going to continue to raise hell until we stop this genocide. So contact your member of Congress, protest peacefully as the Constitution allows you to do, and raise your voice. Demand accountability to U.S. and international law. Silence is not an option, as that further enables war crimes and genocide. You have my commitment to continue to speak up relentlessly, even when it isn't popular, because that is the obligation upon us. All right, you guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back, same time, same place next week. I appreciate your support. Hit that subscribe button and have a safe and blessed week. You've been listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View. Be well and peace.